Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, John and I are continuing our conversation on Strongholds. We're talking about Barbarians. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. John and I are talking about Barbarian Strongholds today. We did an introductory video that kind of explains what a stronghold is, why it's important to games, and today we're going to start looking at these in the scope of how they may come into your game and the different designs and ways you may utilize them. John, why don't you go ahead and get us started? Tell us, I guess, a little bit about Barbarian Strongholds.
Sure. So, Barbarian Strongholds, I think, we're going to talk about a bunch of different fighter classes, I think, throughout this series, but Barbarian Strongholds are interesting because they are, generally speaking, a little bit more barbaric. You don't necessarily have the same notion as like this fighter in the Citadel, so the barbarian is probably going to be more organic, more natural, more nomadic potentially. I like to think of maybe like old Viking style mead halls as being a very good kind of comparison for what a barbarian stronghold might look like. In our current game, we're playing kind of a Beckme 2nd edition type deal, and we have the orc as a class, and it falls for all intents and purposes as a barbarian. So there's the possibility of having a stronghold that is inside of a cave, potentially. It could be in an old ruin of some kind that is being used or built up for any followers or allies that you potentially have as a barbarian character. So there are a bunch of really interesting natural places or dungeon-esque type places that I think fall in really well with a barbarian. It really just kind of depends on your alignment and how you see yourself in that play style, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And when players are first coming into this position of potentially getting a stronghold where they're either building it themselves or having it given to them by the GM, I think it's really important to find a setting and an ambiance that kind of fits their character, that immediately kind of bolsters them into this next stage of who they are as an individual. It's going to mirror what they've done through the campaign so far, kind of their personality, their attitude. I mean, you can also look at things like forts or some sort of like outpost that they're managing on the outskirts of a larger realm. You mentioned orcs. I think of like these hillsides where there's different outposts set about that's around a larger fort somewhere within the center, and maybe they're managing that for the chieftain that's actually managing that's the liege over those hills or whatever you would call it. But it's making sure that the ambiance fits the barbarian that you're creating, and it kind of fits who their character is.
And if you're talking 5th edition, there's like the Zealot Barbarian, which is very religious-y. So you could definitely get away with like a temple ruin or something like that would make a lot of sense. Or even a different type of religious structure, which we kind of talked about in the opening video, which is that if you have a character that is either devout or has interests that lie outside of just the core class, you can start getting away with getting into some of those other types of strongholds. So yeah, I think the next thing is to talk about things that might be in the stronghold besides the stronghold itself, right? The expansions, the additions, whatever it is that you want to call them.
Yeah, and when we think about barbarians, we're probably thinking of it being more of a military type of setting.
Right.
As you mentioned, you may have this arcane piece if it's the zealot. It may be have some noble pieces if you're looking at like that chieftain or that leader mentality. But military really comes in strong. So you may have things like the war room, maybe an armory. This probably doesn't fit so much. It's probably more in the mercantile, but I'd probably give the barbarian a brewery.
Yeah, especially if you're doing like the mead hall type situation, you know.
Yeah.
Or if there's nobility, then there might be something like having access to more governmental type structures within that stronghold. If the barbarian sees themselves as a chief. And then you can also have garrisons for your soldiers. You can have palisades or defensive walls. There's any number of things like that, really, that like you said, military-wise would be beneficial to kind of build out and around to make it feel like a full stronghold.
Yeah, and I wouldn't go all out in the beginning. You want to make
Right.
sure that there's certain levels and steps that you want your player to go through to expand their stronghold and make more out of it. And it's really important that you have a good understanding of where the character wants to take the stronghold and what the story is behind their stronghold. Maybe it starts off with just a couple of things, like an armory and a brewery, and they have this idea of expanding it out and adding on additional pieces as their character grows in power or brings in more followers to their cause. But initially, you may just look at a couple of additions to put within there.
Right. And, we have, like I said, this is something that I've worked on in the past, so I have a huge list, I think, of like 50 different additions, expansions that I offer to players whenever they're using the system within the games that I run. But you can really get creative with this just in terms of like options that are available. Is it on the water? Are they going to have docks? Is it like a steampunk style era where you're going to have other trade venues such as airships, which is a little bit crazy for something like a barbarian. So I think that you really should kind of keep things in perspective, that it's not going to get wild and like out of the realm of where does the barbarian fit, not only within the world, but within the society. How do they see themselves? How do they see the world around them? It's pretty easy to let this kind of thing get out of control if you're not careful with it.
Yeah, and like I said, it's really important to know the full story behind it before you're introducing it to the character. So let's say that you give your character a fort in the hills where there's other forts and outposts within the hills, where there's other outposts and there's a major fort and they all have expansions and additions as well. You probably want to give some good information to the player about what exists out there before they build whatever's within their stronghold specifically, unless you're just handing it over to them. I wouldn't want to potentially give my character a stronghold that has a blacksmith shop and a granary if the outpost next door has those things and they can potentially go overtake that soon and have access to those as well.
Well, since you're talking about, let's talk about acquiring the stronghold. So you mentioned several times the GM kind of giving it. I generally speaking, that will come through like an NPC, right? So the barbarian might have done something for the actual chief of a tribe, and so he is given dominion over an area within that chief's dominion. I'm using the same words over and over again. But the chief has this domain, right? And he says, oh, this area over here I don't have control over, or it really needs a strong leader because the recent leader died and didn't have an heir, whatever it is. And so he gifts this to one of the players so that they can go and take it. Alternatively, this could be a situation where there's already somebody who is in control of this region, and so maybe the barbarian character is coming in and conquering it and saying he's a bad chief, he's doing bad things for his people, and whenever he eliminates that threat or that antagonist, he suddenly finds himself, or she suddenly finds herself, in control of that stronghold in some way. And like you said, it may be a situation where the stronghold is dilapidated and it needs work. I think generally speaking, if you're talking about a lower level character, or a character that's just on the cusp of accessing a stronghold, it makes sense that there's work to be done in order to be able to utilize it. So those are generally the two normal avenues that you come across for getting a stronghold, is either it's given to you or it's conquered by the player, particularly for fighter types.
And this is, I think, kind of leading into what quests may look like, which I think is one of the struggles we identified in our first video, that it's hard to make the gameplay meaningful and interesting after strongholds are introduced, because it has kind of a different level of gameplay. But you might, this stronghold needs work and areas need to be mended, or there's upkeep that needs to be accomplished, maybe there are quests to head out and find lumber, or to attack bands that have goods that are traveling by, supply bands, other things that need to be done where you're now gaining things to bring back to get your stronghold into working order so that it's functional, or even going out and finding NPCs that are going to manage your stronghold or manage certain aspects of the stronghold. And so you need to capture individuals to come back to make sure that those areas are being managed well.
I mean, hopefully capturing isn't... I mean, are you enslaving people? Is that your plan?
In the Barbarian Stronghold, that might be the case. I don't know what type of world we're living in.
Right. So...
very common in... Well, you mentioned Norse earlier, the Norse campaign.
Yeah.
When we were talking, and so that sometimes was the case.
Yeah, it was. But yeah, there's options for basically, it becomes stronghold centric at that point, which is one of the things that we talked about as well. Is that if you're interested in a campaign that is stronghold centric, you can definitely do this, and you can just have quest after quest after quest of going out and getting people and bringing them back and recruiting people. You also have the option of trying to bring people underneath your protection. So it's like there's this neighboring region that is either not under control of anyone or it's under control again of some kind of corrupt ruler, and your character can go to their aid, or the character can go to the aid of that village, and suddenly that village says, you know what, you protected us, we're going to throw our lot in with you, and we're going to be paying you taxes or tithes or whatever in respect for what you've done for us in your protection. And so long as you continue to extend that protection. And so then there becomes that kind of building aspect of I'm bringing people into my fold, almost Fallout 4 style, where you're going and helping a settlement in order to be able to gain their favor.
So how would you build this, potentially having strongholds built outside of the PC? Unless there's something else you wanted to add for the character themselves.
I don't think so at this stage. So yeah, So we've been talking about the PC, right? So potentially strongholds, and we kind of decided that we wanted to talk about strongholds as being something outside of the PC. So it's something that the NPC has. And the NPC, as somebody who has a stronghold that the players are coming to visit, is very similar in the sense that the DM really wants to provide a description of this, which we talked a lot about settlements in our previous series, 2 series ago. But the idea of a stronghold specifically is, where does the NPC, and usually this is either a quest giver or an antagonist, and if it's a quest giver, it's somebody where it's like you're going into their domain, what does it look like? Which you can include the same things that we've talked about. Why does the barbarian quest giver, the barbarian king or the barbarian chief, what does his stronghold look like? What are the additions or the expansions? What things are available there? You go in there and it's like, does he have a war room? Does he have a garrison of soldiers? Does he have a treasury where he keeps the rings that he gives out to his allies, and so that they can show their devotion to him, that type of thing. But going in there, the quest giver NPC may be asking the players to do the same kind of things that the PC having their own stronghold would do, such as going out and defending his settlements, going out and recruiting people to bring them to his cause, that type of thing. It's an interesting way for the PCs to be a part of a stronghold without necessarily being in control of the stronghold itself, and gives them a little bit more maneuverability to come and go as they please.
And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we do have those settlement videos that kind of go into a lot of different aspects, but you do want to make sure this is fully developed, where you have specialized NPCs that are at his command, whether that be a guard, a hero, maybe advisors. You want the stronghold to feel full. You want it to be somewhat of a challenge so that your players don't just come in and overthrow him and suddenly take the stronghold if you intend to have him be a quest giver. So you want to make sure that there is, I don't know, some meat to what it is that you're building, so it doesn't feel like it's just a skeleton structure when they walk in.
Yeah, and we're crossing lines there a little bit because, is this an ally or is this an enemy is a very important thing. So, which is going to be dependent on the campaign and the particular quest line that the PCs are on. But if they're going in there and it's a potential ally, you do still want that structure. You want it to feel full. If it's an antagonist, then that's something else entirely. So how do the PCs go about conquering this? And this almost becomes dungeon building at a certain point. But I think with the idea, I think sometimes the perspective of switching this from, this isn't a dungeon, this is a stronghold for this barbarian chief, I feel like that feels different. And it sometimes is beneficial as a GM to approach the chief or the antagonist as being somebody who has their own stronghold rather than the chief just being an antagonist in a dungeon. Does that make sense?
It does to me, because when I think of dungeons, I think of them as being like one and dones.
Right.
They're kind of a blip that disappear. And when you're thinking of strongholds, this is a ongoing structure that still has meaning and purpose even after the elimination of the person that is managing or directing or owning that particular place. So if they come in and they take out the chief that's hiding away in the caves, then that doesn't really seem to have a lot. Like, you kill them and you move on with your life. But if you're going to a stronghold where they now have, they have archers, they have maybe actions within there, like lair actions that are set up within the place. They have different places, like you said, the armory and the garrison kind of put together a treasury. It's now we're clearing this out and we're taking control of these resources, and we're able to utilize them and be able to build up. It's not just coming in and leaving.
Yeah, I think scope is important, because you mentioned like having a garrison, because this is something that you would offer to the PCs to have, but I think it's also important that it's offered to the antagonist to have his own garrison of archers or soldiers. How are the PCs approaching this? Because it may not be as simple as just walking in the front door and challenging the chief. Maybe it's a world or a society or a culture that supports the idea that somebody can challenge him for rulership. But this is really an attack if it's the intention to eliminate them, at which point you're dealing with actual trained ranks of soldiers, and that shouldn't be an easy task. And it may require subterfuge and actually to bypass things like the walls on the outside or the palisade, to get into the actual room where the chief is resided with his elite guard and his arcanist that he keeps at his shoulder in order to protect him. So I think that all of those things together result in an entirely different dynamic if you're intending that this be something that's conquerable. How do the PCs approach this versus a dungeon?
Yeah, and I don't want to go too much in the weeds, but I probably will anyway. The other piece of this, too, that I find really interesting when I think of strongholds is that for someone to have a stronghold, even a barbarian stronghold, it means that they potentially have allies, they have bannermen, they have means to get information out and bring in reinforcements. To have that type of a structure built within any land means that there is some connection and relationships to those that are adjacent to them. And PCs should have to consider that type of thing before they move in and take out the antagonist that's within that location.
Right. And I do want to touch on one last thing here, because you had mentioned it slightly, and I think it would be beneficial or interesting to look at from a DM's perspective, in that if the players are going in intending to eliminate this chief and he is found within his stronghold, then it would make sense that he would have lair actions of some kind, which is very common in 5th edition to have the primary antagonist have lair actions. It's really reserved primarily, I think, for things that are dragons or giants or something that have this identifiable lair. It's not generally used for PCs, and I feel like it's a useful thing to have, that the barbarian, when he is within his throne room, he is able to call upon certain lair actions, and these may be different. This may be like he calls his archers, so archers come to the balcony and suddenly they fire a volley of arrows at the players, and so that is a lair action. Or he blows his war horn, and his war horn elicits a fear check of some kind among all of the players. Those types of things I think make sense as being lair actions for a barbarian when he is found within his stronghold. And depending on how you feel about this may be something you could extend to the PC as well, if a PC barbarian has his own stronghold and is for some reason attacked within his home.
You took like both of my examples I was going to give when we were going to talk about lair actions. I was like, dang it, those are both the things I was going to say. But yeah, those are
good options.
They are good options.
All right, I think as far as Barbarian Strongholds, that's all that I have. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add, Joshua, before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so.
All right, so if you like the content and you found something useful in this video, please like the video. It helps the channel out. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and we will check you out in the next one. You check us out in the next one.
We're going to check each other out.
Jon and Josh.